Hi, everybody. My name is Dominic DeMaria. I'm an agent with Porcupine Real Estate, and today we're here for the On the Menu Food Freedom in New Hampshire panel. So today I am joined by Travis Corcoran. You want to introduce yourself, Travis?
Let's see. Moved to New Hampshire for the FSP about 10 years ago, 10 years and 6 weeks, something like that. I'm a science fiction author. I've won the Prometheus Award for libertarian science fiction twice. I live on a homestead. I raise my own sheep, pigs, chickens, and get a lot of food off of the orchard and gardens. About 18 months ago, I was elected to the state legislature, so now I represent Hillsborough 44, and that is a mostly thankless job because either you lose, a vote 300 to 100, or you win, 290 or something. But I had a really good day on Thursday where a lot of votes, like 6 of them went 188, 187. So for the first time, I actually did, the other guys helped too, but so...
Great. And Stephen Nass is also here today.
Hi, I moved for the Free State Project about 8 years ago from Wisconsin. I'm a career chef. I currently working feeding children at a school, but I'm also part of the Independence Inn and have a homestead with my wife Mackenzie here. Then also more relevant to today, we have the Free State Food Network, which if you didn't get one of our food freedom guides, this is the first edition here, so it's collectible. Make sure you grab one. She'll have some, I have some. And then, I also one of the founders at the Shell Libertarian Community Center over in Rollinsford, New Hampshire. Definitely check it out and check out our calendar and come to one of the events there. Food-wise, we do potlucks at least once a month, sometimes many more times.
So that's the contact information there. So we wanted to have this panel today to talk about the what is food freedom, or what does it mean to us, and why is it so important in New Hampshire, and how does New Hampshire rank versus the rest of the country? Because there are lists published quite a bit, and New Hampshire never seems to be on that list, no matter how hard we're trying to get towards it. So, and Stephen has been a huge force in that specific category. So,
yeah, it's really frustrating that we're not on those lists because we actually are really good, I think, on food freedom. But I think it's a marketing thing. Maine does stuff like passing resolutions for food freedom that have no teeth and are just like put them at our level. But it gets the front page news, so they get on the top 10 list.
Sorry, I'm just opening my notes. So when we say food freedom, what do you mean specifically?
My main thought as sort of a traditional libertarian is that it's, sort of 80% freedom from regulation. But a lot of times, I'm going to make an analogy, but I'm going to come right back. You can talk to somebody about, say, freedom of speech, and if you're talking to an attorney, they are too focused, and they say, okay, right, the First Amendment, and you say, well, wait a second, there's more to freedom of speech than merely protection against government censorship. It also includes a culture of freedom of speech. You could imagine a First Amendment, but a culture that was so stultifying that the Overton window of what you can actually say and keep a job. You don't have to imagine it. We're getting kind of close to it these days. And so similarly, I think that food freedom is not just about regulation, where there's certainly good work already done and more work to be done, but also a culture of it. And I was not aware of the Food Freedom Network until like 5 minutes ago flipping through this. And so I want to compliment you on doing something to sort of publicize the fact that these various farms and restaurants are out there.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's not only regulation and everything like that, but it's also the ability to produce and consume and, take into your home what you want. Freedom from regulations on what you can buy and keep for yourself.
Yeah, I think freedom for me ultimately has to do with choices, the ability to choose what you want to do. And when we're talking like natural rights, you have the natural right to do whatever you need to do for your own survival, and food is definitely essential to survival. So I don't think that any other third party should be telling you what you can and cannot consume, what you can and cannot produce for your own consumption, and then dealing with others as well.
And then the other aspect of it too is just fostering the small businesses that make those choices possible too. Okay, let's see here. So how does New Hampshire compare to other states as far as food freedom go, in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, I think we do quite well. We have the big, broad bases covered, and we have to do a lot of like nitpicking to get us to the level of some other states. Like we're not exceptionally bad on anything, but we're also not the best on anything. So, like for example, right now we're battling with raw milk. You can definitely go buy raw milk in New Hampshire, but if you want to have raw milk ice cream over a container of this size, that is unacceptable risk. The government does not like you to have that. They think you're going to leave it on the counter overnight, put it back in the freezer, bring it back out again, eat it, and die. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy there where we want to be free, but we're not like quite there on a lot of these issues.
And do you think that the states where that's possible, that there's no restrictions on raw milk, do you think that is purposeful, or do you think it's just something that they're not worried about in general? Do you have people?
I think it's deliberate.
Yeah. Do you think so?
On that, I don't really know. I wouldn't want to guess other people's motivations. I think that in general, anti-liberty is often just people conforming to the, defaults or the standards. I think most people are just raised in a culture. So, in Russia in 1970, it's not that everyone decided to be a communist. It's just you're raised in it. And I think that prevails in a lot of states. And I'm going to branch off slightly. One of the issues that I think, we need to be clear on is the distinction between state regulation and federal regulation. And obviously, we shouldn't, on the one hand, we shouldn't worry too much about federal regulation because there's nothing we can do about it. But on the other hand, it is important to know what is federally regulated and what's not, because a lot of times constituents or just randos on the internet, who know I'm a state rep will say, "Oh, you know what New Hampshire needs to do? Legalize machine guns or APCs or And I'm like, well, that's great, but we don't control the ATF. And I'm going to avoid the tangent of what sorts of things you could do. Regarding interstate commerce. So when you talk about New Hampshire food freedom, one thing that you have to, think about is, hey, if the USDA has regulations on the minimum size of beef that you can sell off of your homestead farm, then we could, first of all, we don't have regulations for the most part that duplicate that, so there's not even anything to repeal, but there's not necessarily a whole lot that we could do to encourage something. Now, I know that, and I'm running along, so I'll wrap it up really quickly. I know that marijuana legalization is an example of where this has gone the other way, where the feds have kept their laws on the books, but states have effectively decriminalized. But I would argue that that only happened sort of when the wink and the nod was coming down from the absolute top at the federal level. That we are not going to go after individuals. So when you have a certain party running D.C. and then the same party is running California, you hear, yeah, okay, we're going to let you get away with it. You can pass whatever state laws you want. If we ever got the impression that the USDA was not going to crack down on homesteads in New Hampshire for selling 3-pound cuts of beef, then that would be great.
Well, I'd love to piggyback off of what you said, and I disagree a little bit that there's nothing to be done, because I think we are working on some of this stuff. In my dive into like New Hampshire law and why we have these problems, I ran into the same thing you're saying, where I'm like, New Hampshire seems to be pretty good on these things, but it's the feds. Or New Hampshire decided, we don't care, we'll just do whatever the feds say we're going to do. So we have to look for those kind of ways to wiggle around that, and until we can like fully push off the feds. And some examples of like overburdens, or an example of wiggling around it is, one is like looking at, we don't have enough slaughterhouses in our state. And if you, like, the commissioner of agriculture didn't fully know the history when I talked to him on this, but like in the 70s, up until the 1970s, New Hampshire, like many states, was doing its own slaughterhouses and inspections, but we just said, oh, it'd be easier if the USDA and the feds do it. And at the time, short term, seemed like, yeah, now we don't have to worry about it. It's not one of the things our state has to do anymore. But now that they closed down a lot of them and made the regulations too big, so like one slaughterhouse, if you want to have one, you need to have an office in there with its own bathroom just for an inspector to be on site that works for the feds. Like, it's absurd how cost millions and millions of dollars to build a new slaughterhouse now when it didn't used to. So one of the things we could do is move those things back to the state and be like, no more feds, which most states have moved in the other direction. Another example would be bill that's, I think, going to fail here, but that's fine. There's a thing called checkoff programs where for every gallon of milk sold, you need to give a certain amount of that sale to some other organization on the national level for marketing and research. And for every head of cattle, you have to give $1 to some company out in Colorado for national promotion of cattle, not just your cattle here, but national. And so we have a bill to try and make it so that New Hampshire keeps those programs voluntary, because on a national level, those programs used to be voluntary, and now they're not voluntary. And so now it's just a tax that we all pay on our food that we don't get to see and don't know about.
Yeah, and these are industries that you don't necessarily think of, but like when you see the Got Milk ads or the beef is what's for dinner? Is that the one?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, yeah, pork.
Yeah, pork,
other
the other
white
white
meat.
meat.
Yes,
Yep.
all of those. There's 21 different food items that have those research and development and promotional programs, and those are all part of that checkoff program. So
And-
every sale has a portion of those dollars go to marketing automatically.
Yeah, so things we could do is make sure that our state doesn't enforce those federal programs. So if a farmer's I'm not going to pay that milk fee anymore, and I'm just going to discount my milk for you, the consumer, then we can at least have it in law that our state's going to be well, feds, you're going to have to go after these milk producers because we're not going to enforce your laws.
Hopping back a topic or two, I did not want to be perceived as saying there's nothing we can do at the state level. What I was trying to say, and maybe I flubbed it a little bit, is it is important to sort of map out the conceptual space and be clear that there are, where the feds, definitively have their rules and enforce those, then we can't, roll that back. It's in the thing where New Hampshire goes beyond that, or where there are optional implementations. And I want to double down on the slaughterhouse thing because I think that's a really good argument. I've done for 10 years the vast majority of my butchering of sheep and pork myself at the farm. But on one occasion, I had to use a commercial slaughterhouse and butcher, and there's a wait list and schedules and all sorts of stuff, and so there really is, I don't want to say market failure, because market failures are always turn out to be downstream of regulation, but this is a really great idea to look into the non-USDA inspection, because I believe the USDA program requires one inspector per so many livestock that are going through, but with a floor of one. So if you've got a facility that wants to just process 10 cow a year, that has one full-time USDA inspector, and I believe that inspector is on the payroll of the butchery, or at least fees flow to the feds, which then flow back to his salary. So you get this real cliff. And in general, when you're looking at regulations or transfer payments or other things, you always have to look at incentives. And there can be programs that are bad, but as long as the incentives are sort of smooth. So, like a flat tax. You earn $1,000, you pay $10 in taxes. You earn another $1,000, it's another $10. You're like, okay, I want to earn money, so I'll keep doing this. But we have some federal programs where there's this threshold effect where if you're on welfare and then you get a job for 5 hours a week, suddenly your effective tax can go to 900%, on the first couple of dollars. And I think that there's probably a threshold effect when it comes to the size of butchering.
Mm-hmm. And just so everybody's aware, USDA butchers are required if you want to retail your meat. But if you're doing it for yourself, you don't necessarily have to deal with that kind of thing.
And another detail on sort of for yourself and, informal market and everything. I mentioned in passing something about the minimum size that you can sell. So right now on my homestead, I can sell a live animal to a friend. I can, slaughter, skin, gut, and, sell a whole carcass to a friend. I can sell a half to a friend, which is, sort of vertical. You get the left half, I'll keep the right half. But that is the limit. I cannot sell a quarter. That's where the regulations say, now you're doing butchering. It's arbitrary. And, that might be okay when it comes to sheep, where, half of a sheep is, 60 pounds. But when it comes to a cow, where a half might be 700 pounds, my friend might not want that much meat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then so we'll go into the specific topics now. So the organic certification in New Hampshire has been an issue. I have some notes, but if you want to say it in your own words, you might be able to do it.
Yeah, so this was kind of an exciting win for freedom in New Hampshire that just happened last week, I think.
Yeah.
So just a little background, I'll just be very brief. organic certification is a federal program in New Hampshire, which is unique. Most states, it's not like this. The state of New Hampshire was enforcing the certified organic program and doing the inspections and that kind of thing, and they've been scaling it back. All the states around us, private organizations do the certification. This fall, I put in a bill to stop the state of New Hampshire from doing it, and another organization put in 2 other bills to give more money and mandate that the state has to be doing the certification. And this, like last week or 2 weeks ago, those bills failed, and the Commissioner of Agriculture said, we don't want to be doing this program anymore. We shouldn't be doing this program. And so in like a month or so, the certification of organic in New Hampshire will no longer be done by the state, and all of the people that were doing it with the state have to go find private organizations to do it with, which was a pretty big win.
Pretty cool.
So
yeah,
it was
after
really good.
April 27th is the actual cutoff date, and so then you'll need to find a third-party agency, which can take up to 6 months for some farms. So if you're not on top of it, you're going to lose your organic certification.
Yeah, but thankfully most of the organic farms in the state already were going through a private organization, not the state of New Hampshire. And the ones that did want to go through the state of New Hampshire, the only reason that they could really iterate why they were doing that is because the state of New Hampshire's program, being a government program, was really poorly ran and had the same pricing from the 1980s. So when they should have been charging farmers, for example, $3,000, they were charging them $300. So I think you could see why you would want to do business with them instead of a private company because they were being subsidized in a huge way.
So on the topic of your organization working to put a bill in and other organizations working to put contrary bills in, I want to go off on a brief digression that I think is not on the outline, but I think Dominic will probably give me some leeway. And that is the question of how, as a citizen, can you engage in sort of the legal fight on this sort of thing. And so getting elected to the legislature has been really eye-opening to me. And part of that is shocking, but part of that is good. In general, the only person who can submit a bill is a legislator, but there are 400 legislators in New Hampshire. We have the absolute highest ratio of legislators to citizens of anywhere in the U.S. And so my, first month or so in New Hampshire, I went to a FSB meetup, and there was a legislator there. And oh my gosh, I didn't realize they're a dime a dozen. We don't get offices. We pay for our own business cards, and we get paid $100 a year. Only nuts do it. But anyway, you can work with a legislator, and it's relatively easy for him to submit a bill. So you should be able to just ask a favor. Now, the problem comes after the bill is submitted. Nothing in the world is frictionless and just coasts on pure momentum. So you need, some sort of political discipline. The first thing that happens with a bill is it is assigned to a committee. So if it's a bill about, fishing, it will go to the Fish and Game Committee. If it's a bill about a tax repeal or a tax hike, it will go to the Finance Committee, and so forth and so on. And these committees schedule hearings. And the committees are split between the parties in roughly the same proportion as the parties control the House. So right now, with the House of 400 split, like 200 Republicans, 198 Democrats, and 2 independents, and 1 missing, something like that, the committees are all split 50-50. And the chairmanship of each committee, is sort of evenly split too. So this one will have a Dem, this one will have a Republican. For the most part, committees will vote the party line, or the members on a committee. But the people in these committees are not closed-minded bigots. They're open-minded. If you can make a case, so there's 2 things. One, there's making the intellectual case, but we've probably all tried to explain libertarianism to people, and we've probably had tons of success, I'm sure. So people don't like crazy ideas, even if they make a lot of sense. But you come in, saying, hey, nuclear weapons should be privately owned, or we should have David Friedman personal protection services or something. That's an upstream sell. But a lot of people do respond to a sort of second-hand or third-hand validation of concepts. So if you introduce a bill about homeschooling and you bring 50 families to it and they testify one after another, you're not going to convert every single Dem there, especially the 5 that are teachers. You're never going to get 20-0 on this committee recommendation, but you might be able to sway 2 or 3 or 4, and suddenly a bill is 13-7 or 14-6. there's a threshold, and I don't know exactly what it is, but it's something like 13.7 or 15.5 for a bill to get out of committee. So if you just walk in with your crazy idea, and it's so crazy that even 3 of the Republicans say, I don't know about this, shouldn't meat be clean? Are you trying to sell meat out of the back of your pickup truck? You're going to get out of there, 15.5 against, and your bill is dead. If you can get it up to the certain threshold, then it at least comes to the floor. So this is the key pressure point that New Hampshire citizens have, which is to create informal networks, and this is a wonderful example of how this works. Create networks, get names, get in touch with people on email or Facebook, and get them to committee hearings. And, work ahead of time to talk about talking points and be persuasive. You don't want to walk up there and say, the teachers and the librarians are trying to put pornography in the libraries. You might actually be right about that point, but the goal is you're trying to convince some of the people who are on the other side of this. So again, if you're renting that the Federal Reserve is trying to keep, free range meat, it's not going to work. You want to talk about the things that, somewhat normal people want to hear, which is jobs and choice and other stuff. So anyway, long rant.
Well, if I could piggyback off of that and just tie it into exactly how the food stuff goes before committee, because been down there a bunch, and you can just watch the committee hearings online and see how people are doing it. For example, the organic one, the emotional appeals are okay on the agriculture committee, that also handles other food stuff. Is it agriculture and public works or something? I forget what the name of the committee is.
But I'm a first termer. I don't know a lot.
It's boring government stuff, but the people will come up and make appeals about, like, for the organic one, they came up and were like, I'm an organic farmer, I want it to be like this. But then, the commissioner of agriculture goes up and says, we don't have the money for this, we can't do this. And if it's a thing where it's going to cost them more money, the Republicans aren't going to go for it. So boom, you won them, you don't need the appeal. And then most of the people on the committee for agriculture have some sort of farming background or think they have like an interest in agriculture and farming, because we are a very farm to table state. So it's actually, that kind of stuff works really well with them.
Yeah, and just to clarify too, in case everybody's not following, but the organic thing is a good thing. We're not making it harder to get organic certified. We're actually making it mean something again, basically, is what it means. So. Yeah.
And, I think that's in general the libertarian stance. There's all sorts of things that states do that are maybe fine things, right? I mean, when people are against government schools, that doesn't mean they're against people learning to read. They just think that private organizations might teach those skills better. And the same thing with organic certification. The classical example from, David Friedman in the 70s or 80s or something is, home inspections, et cetera. We've got this model of Underwriter's Lab that privately inspects electronic devices. We know that, competing free market regulatory agencies can solve problems.
Right. Mm-hmm. So we're going to move on to raw milk. So raw milk in the state of New Hampshire is legal with some restrictions. Mm-hmm. So we kind of touched on that a little bit. Was there anything else you wanted to add about the raw milk stuff?
Not too much to add about raw milk. There's not a lot of laws about it in our state. There is, the fear of people getting sick from raw milk, which is preventing us from being fully legalized. But it's not hard to get raw milk here, so it's pretty nice, and we'll just keep pushing on it. But we're not the worst.
I've got a friend who is the plant facility manager for a milk plant in New York State. And so I will fully back the libertarian legal norms here that, screw the state, get them out of this. But on the other hand, I'm going to be an absolute normie and say, I'm still going to get my milk homogenized. Thank you very much.
So my wife is a cheesemaker. So I feel very strongly about raw milk. If you want it, go for it. I would still pasteurize my milk. I've seen the status of some cows, so it is what it is. So, but that should be your right to make that decision. So,
and actually, let me jump in and 15-second digression. One of the interesting things about food processing is sort of surface area and duration and temperature when it comes to the growth of pathogens. And so, people can dry age steak. You have a big cut of, 40 pounds, you put it on a shelf and you just leave it there for, 3 months. And there's absolutely mold. And, hopefully it's all good mold, but it could even be a little bad mold. But it percolates into the interior at a very low rate such that you can then carve that away and know that you've done a pretty good job of keeping it clean. And, all meat comes out of the carcass, in a very sterile state. The thing you can't do is put out ground beef or ground anything, because you take the interior and then by grinding it, you mix it into the interior. And, it's the same way as inoculating blue cheese, where you have moved the bacteria or whatever all the way in. And so now there is nearly infinite surface area. It's like a Menger sponge fractal shape or something. And so that is one of the reasons that I would happily eat beef that has been dry aged for months and months and months, but anything that is liquid or ground, et cetera, I'm going to be a lot more dubious.
So the next thing we have is homestead food operations and labeling laws. So many states don't allow food manufacturing for safety reasons, but New Hampshire does in many cases. So if you have an operation based out of your home, there are specific standards that you have to meet, but it is possible for you to sell products out of your home kitchen. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, we definitely have some ways to go on this. It's fairly free. One of our biggest advantages with our homesteading laws in New Hampshire that I've found is that the New Hampshire Department of Health, and whatever their long title is, Department of Health, is really, they would say poorly staffed. I would say overstaffed, and just unable to keep up with the demand of tracking us and regulating us. So they actually, in most of their testimony that I've seen, what they'll tell you is they're just like, we don't know how many people should be regulated more. We don't know how many people are big enough that they should have this other license and inspections and stuff. So good. If people are just sliding under their radar, that works. That works.
And this gets to the point that we were talking about earlier, which is there's the difference between sort of formal regulation and actually culture. And so, if you can starve the beast where, theoretically there's 500 laws that you might get in trouble for, but there's one regulator running around, that's a pretty good situation.
Right. Yeah, and so the way that the food manufacturing or the way that it works in New Hampshire is they break it into two categories, whether it's potentially hazardous or non-potentially hazardous. So there's categories, both of those. So like non-hazardous would be cookies, muffins, breads, rolls, anything that doesn't have a whole lot of moisture in it that bacteria can grow in. And then anything that does would be like cheesecakes, pumpkin pies, custards, soups, sandwiches, those kind of things. Those are considered potentially hazardous, so you would need a license to produce and sell those items. And then you do need a license if you want to sell on the internet or be distributed to like farm stores or things like that. So, and then the big thing that came up recently was the limit on how much you can sell. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, that was a bill last year that we submitted as our food network with the help of our Liberty legislators. And essentially, there was a revenue limit for how much revenue you could get from your homestead food operations before you needed to get these extra restrictions and go through all this red tape. And previous Liberty people had gotten that number from, I believe, 22,000 to like 35,000. And I said, well, let's just keep that ball moving. So I said, let's just double the number because it doesn't matter what number we pick. It's just trying to push it. And when we testified before the committee, they absolutely grilled me. It was there were so many questions, but they were like, well, how did you come up with that number? I said, well, it's just arbitrary. I just doubled it. And they said, well, how did we come up with our first number that's in the law? I said, it's also arbitrary. So then they surprisingly came back and said, well, if it's all arbitrary, let's just not have a number and just be done with it.
Wow, common sense.
Yeah, it was great. And again, that was where the state testified that they're like, we don't know who's making below or above that number and should be regulated because it's all you have to go to the state and tell them, hey, I'm making too much money. Can you please come investigate me? So, it worked out quite well in that case. And they actually, when it went over to the Senate, I don't know how this happens, but like it went over to the Senate and they're like, we want to tack on more wording to the bill to legalize like red deer and bison farming, and it removed that red tape. And I was like, oh, please don't make that bill fail because you just added a bunch of stuff on. But that passed too, so that was great.
So yeah, big win on that
so,
one. So
another sort of legislative note on all of this. This is a good area where the state doesn't seem to have a vested interest in pushing back. The regulators, seem to be saying, oh, less work for us sounds good.
Yeah.
There are other areas of law where you do have a lot of rice bowls being filled because of state regulations. Education is one of these, where you have the entire, teachers organization always pushing back on any attempt to increase liberty in education. And there is this, what I think is terrible sort of financial flow, where you pay your property taxes in New Hampshire, and some of that goes to the town, some of it goes to the school district, which is a different governmental body. And then each of these governmental bodies chips in to lobbying groups, which lobby against citizens and against citizen legislators. So there is, for the town side, the New Hampshire Municipal Organization, which, I've introduced a few bills to limit the power of town government. And, I got up there and testified, and then I sat down, and the town organization's lobbyist stood up and said, basically, no, citizens shouldn't be free. This is very important. All the town administrators agree on this. And I was just gobsmacked. And I was in, and I'm not the only one who feels this way. I was in another hearing early and heard testimony for a unfortunately doomed bill, where someone else was offended by this and was trying to limit the ability of governments to pay for lobbyists, and it went nowhere. So anyway, the topic is food freedom, and so it's great to hear that in the food freedom, we are not having lobbyists do that. But when you sort of take what you learn here and apply it to other aspects of the liberty fight, be aware that there is that surprise enemy.
All right, we briefly touched on the checkoff program, so I'm going to kind of move over that one. But I do have the meals and rooms tax, which there was just some recent stuff on that one, too, so I'd like to talk about that. Okay, here. So meals and rooms tax does affect restaurants more than it does people who produce food to sell at retail. So if, there's an 8.5% tax right now on meals and rooms in New Hampshire. So a lot of people say it's a tax-free state as far as things like sales tax go, but there are smaller taxes like that get lumped into service industries. So there's been, I have a note here, HB 1422. Do you know about that one?
I don't know
The specific,
names
yeah.
memorized.
It's the would reduce the tax to 6% is what they're trying to propose, which would put a ton more money back into the hotels and businesses' pockets, which they could put towards any number of things. So.
There is a slightly complicated set of incentives about cutting taxes. When I came into the legislature, one thing, and this is when fuel prices like $5 a gallon for gasoline, and we got a memo from the Republican Party leadership on the topic of, hey, your constituents are going to ask you, can you cut fuel taxes? And we suggest that you dance around the issue. And the reason for that is because 50% of the New Hampshire gasoline taxes are paid by non-New Hampshire residents. So basically, wow, if you were to cut that tax, that money will be replaced. I mean, the government's going to eat, unfortunately. And so they will then ramp up the taxes, in some other way. I've become a slightly more nuanced libertarian where, cut all the taxes, but look at the incentives first. So.
Interesting, yeah, because I have a stat here that just says like 80% of the taxes paid statewide come from the meals portion tax, which that blows my mind. That's a lot of money.
And where I was going to go is I don't have the answer, but I'm curious what percent of that is paid from out-of-staters doing tourism here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it is a very big tourist state, so I mean we do get a lot of money in that way. So, anything on that? No. Nope. Okay. And then just the local food battle we'll talk about recently, where there was this one specific one that came up last year, which is kind of a free speech thing, but also an issue as far as food freedom goes. And you dealt with it specifically. So
yeah, I looked into it a bit, and up in Conway or North Conway, I forget which one.
Concord.
But yeah, it was. There's a bakery up there that ran into some problems. If you see on the slide there, they have this big mural. Well, it's kind of cut off in the image. That above their actual sign there's a mural that some high school kids painted above the bakery. And because the mural points towards the road, kind of, the town said, that's a sign, and we didn't approve of a sign of that big on the side of your building advertising your delicious baked goods. If you had just put it on the other side of the building, it would have been fine. And they said, well, we're not taking that down. We're not painting over it. And so, yeah, they for whatever reason, the town really dug in and said, you have to change this, and it's, going all the way up the ladder, and everybody else in the town, I mean, if high school kids painted it, then clearly the town's going to support the bakery. So I don't know why the town's digging in on this, but yeah, so it's a big battle, and now it's a free speech thing, which could be a cool win if that happens, where the towns can no longer say what they can put on their sign.
Well, and that goes back to a lot of smaller towns in New England in general, which are historical. So they have these historical preservation societies. Like I bartend in Exeter on the weekends, and like there's these restrictions on what kinds of signs you can have on your buildings because they have to be historically accurate. But then you walk down the street and somebody else has like a neon sign of some sort in a window, and you're like, so I can't put a metal sign. It has to be wood. But they can have a neon sign. What part of colonial New England is the neon sign in?
Yeah, well,
you doesn't make any sense.
You actually don't see very many neon signs in New Hampshire because they are actually illegal. I forget the wording of the law, but yeah, that's why you don't see like a big Bud Light neon thing on the side of a bar, is that's actually not legal here.
Interesting.
So there was sort of a question of, I don't know why the town would do this. And, a quick question. How many people here are from out of state? Okay, good. So
wow.
This is worth talking about. If you're, outside of New Hampshire, and even if you're inside, but you're looking at federal politics, everything is very much two parties. It's, Party A versus Party B, and all political debates are framed in those terms. One thing I've learned in the course of my 4 lawsuits against the town that I live in is that a lot of politics at the local level is not political party based. It is just individual personality based. And a zoning decision comes down because this guy has been on the zoning committee for 30 years and he gets to decide. That's the ideological position, that he gets to decide. And so at the state level, we've talked about how you lobby, and we're all libertarians, but here the libertarians tend to align with the Republicans. And so there's groups you can join in, this and that. At the personal or at the town level, it's a different scheme, and it comes down to personalities. And yeah, that's it. Something to be aware of.
If you ever try to open a business and you have to deal with a fire inspector, my gosh, like the amount of red tape you have to go through and varying opinions from one inspector to the other that like tells you this is perfectly fine. Then somebody else comes in and says, oh, no, he shouldn't have told you that. This is the way it's got to be. And then that first guy comes back and says, who told you to do this? And it's like, it's a whole big thing.
Varying opinions is a huge thing. You might hear that, town X is, wonderful and easy to deal with, but then Jimmy retires and Bud gets hired, and it's a different world.
Yep. And a lot of that happened, too, with the food inspectors, too, because during COVID, a lot of things got very hands-off because they didn't want to hurt any businesses that were already struggling. But now they've hired several new food inspectors who I've had a couple of run-ins with, and they're just like, oh, this is an issue. And it's like, it's been this way for literally 20 years. Like, are you okay? Like, can we just...
Well, I like the food inspectors seem to be also very understaffed in their terms. And just not... Yeah, I've worked at places where I was like...
Never seen
Inspector didn't come last year. Cool.
Okay. Can you just? Yep. Perfect. Okay.
Food culture.
Yeah, we'll skip the food culture. There's a very good food culture here in New Hampshire. A lot of people say like, oh, Vermont is the place to go for cheese and for beer and for all this other stuff like that. New Hampshire's got everything, and there's a seacoast. So.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're trying to wrap it up, so I don't want to talk too much on it. But yeah, I'd love to talk more at some point about how, or maybe I'll write something about how progressives are pushing food culture in this state and how they really love federal money. They really love it. And Mackenzie and I went to a conference this last spring, almost a year ago now, and we expected... It was the New Hampshire Food Gathering. So it was the organizers of all the different food organizations in New Hampshire. And we get there, and most of it was like, this is how you get more money from the feds for your food bank and SNAP program and all that. And we're just like, ugh. So that's it. That's
not talking about the culture, but how to get more money.
Yeah, well, that was their culture of like, this is what you should. This is what you should be doing. Yeah. Meanwhile, the organization that put that on, their lead speaker, their keynote speaker of the event, gave a speech where she was really excited about these 2 new farmers in the state. And I'm like, I think I know these farmers. they're in my magazine. Yeah, they love libertarians until they find out they're libertarians. So
Yeah, like I have just a quick stat here. It's there's over 4,000 farms employing over 20,000 people in New Hampshire, and that comes to about $1.2 billion in revenue that comes into the state because of the agriculture in the state. And it's a small state, so I mean it's very impressive how much farmland there actually is.
To the credit of the progressives, they have a program they're working on right now. I think it's 30% by 2030 of food in New England they want produced in New England, which we can get behind that.
Yeah.
It's just how they're going to do it is, it's central planning, right? It's not great.
No, this is the thing. It would be wonderful if there was a farm stand, or 3 in every single community, but you just know that, when they have these goals, the mechanisms are going to be retarded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the last thing is just how do you get involved? Like how can people take part in this food movement and maintain the food freedom that we have and grow it? So what are the best ways to get involved?
I've got a couple of self-serving answers, so I'm a little bit
Please,
shy.
go right ahead.
First, I was going to say that my state legislator account on Twitter is Travis4NH. Feel free to follow me, DM me with any questions, and if I know the answer, I'll tell you, and if I don't, I'll dig into it. And I've got a couple of books on homesteading on Amazon, Escape the City. Thank you. We've got one happy reader in the audience, 2, it seems. And so I'll already answer any questions for free, but especially if you buy my books, I'll certainly answer any questions. So
I do have a copy of it at the table, so if anybody wants to
flip through it.
Look through it after the session here, that's fine.
Yeah, definitely buy his book. If you didn't get one of these food freedom guides, please grab one.
It's great.
This
It's
is the
cheaper
first
than the book.
edition.
It's
Yep,
free.
we'll have a second edition in the summertime with updates in it, but you should get one of these in the meantime until you were to go. Go to freestatefood.net to follow us. There's a press page with updates on there. You can subscribe to our email list, or if you are in the food industry and you live in New Hampshire, anyway in the food industry, I don't care if you bartend or whatever you do, sign up on our website as a member, and it gets you access to networking with the other members, so that's wonderful. And then, if you get on our email list and I say, hey, please come testify on this bill, you please come testify on it, or you can do it online. Just go online, as long as you live in New Hampshire.
Online testifying is very simple to do. If you live in New Hampshire, you can just click through a few things, submit a little essay, and then it's good to go.
Super easy. If you don't feel like writing it, go to ChatGPT, have them write it for you, and then you're good.
Because realistically, how many times do you think they're actually going to read through it? They're going to take the gist of it and say, okay, they want this, or they don't want this, or whatever it is. So.
And one thing on testifying, I get tons of email on all sorts of controversial bills, and here's what I've talked to other legislators. Here's what we all do: we scroll to the bottom and we look for a street address. If there is not a street address, we delete it without reading it. If there is a street address, we see if it's in our district, and if it's not, we delete it without reading it.
Good to know. That's good information. And then for anybody who is interested in buying a homestead kind of property, or actually any property here in New Hampshire, I am a real estate agent. I work with Porcupine Real Estate. We've helped, me personally, in the last 2 years, I've helped 24 people move to New Hampshire, find houses and properties here. So please reach out to me. I had 11 acres in New York before I moved here, so I'm very familiar with gardening and raising animals and all that stuff too. So if you have specific homesteading questions about the properties that you want to look at, I can help you. So, and if you buy a homestead property with me, I give a copy of Travis's book to you as a gift. So, so yeah, there you go. Great, thanks everybody. Lunch should be ready now. So, thank you.